Ladies, gentlemen, MBs, and welcome back to Warui Deshou. We're here, live on stream once again. I look haggard as fuck, but who cares, Joining me, of course, both in voice and in video for Across the Pond Close Matt is the Soul Doctor. I think he's in that direction. I don't know, I'm becoming points from here, but he's back. He's back!
I'm in that direction in the stream window, at least. So, hello, fam.
Got that right, at least.
Yes, we're both back. The show is back on video, on live video type format.
When you say it's back on video, it makes it sound like they're gonna start selling VHS tapes as a Blockbuster.
Definitely, like hi-fi stereo, 16-bit color, all 16.
Tracking
Dude,
issues.
we spared no expense. Yeah, I wish we could, we could go for that like vaporwave sort of deal at the bottom of our video and have a little tracking fuzz stereo, some noise. It could be great. It could be a whole thing. We could, start talking about start claiming like the shitty looking parts of our video are on purpose.
I'm totally okay with that. That'd be all right. All right, so we are indeed back, and we're here to.
It's good to be back.
Which concluded last Friday. Now, because we have 4 episodes worth of material to cover here, what we're actually going to be doing, folks, is we're not going to be going through plot summaries as we normally would do. Instead, we're going to go through our second stream style format, which is just entirely talking points all the way through from start to finish. And there's certainly plenty to discuss.
There's a lot to talk about.
I've been waiting patiently to uncork some feelings on this show. Boy, oh boy. Anyway, what I will mention at this point is that also, because this is the end of our this particular season of Stream of Thought, we will be going into a new show soon enough, and there'll be stuff about new formats and the way we're going to be doing things at the end of this live stream. We're going to be talking about that and the future of Warui Deshou. And Go-Go Site Robot joining us in chat is correct. It has been 84 years. I mean, I just woke up in a coma.
Approximately.
This morning, that's why I, listeners is ended. It's time for me to talk about it, so I'm just going to rise from my grave, basically, So we're going to be talk about that.
Hello,
I'll
Go-Go.
also take a preamble here just to mention that we are also going to be restructuring our Patreon rewards and offers as a result of this. So do check out our Patreon on patreon.com/Warui Deshou. The benefits will change. They'll mostly be similar to what we've currently got, but with some additions and some tweaking, make things more efficient, make it easy for us to make content. But if you definitely want to have a look at that and maybe, consider helping us financially, then I'd be very appreciative. I can't even spend my money on beer really anymore at the moment because of the lockdown. I'm just saying, so it goes to a better place. But we are currently also using our funds to, help with some good causes, not least of which being what was the Anime Dormitory project, but now I believe is them actually renaming it. Am I right?
No, well, there's an additional one. The folks behind the Anime Dormitory still do that. There's still ongoing support for each year of occupants in the dorm. They did the 2021. They started that. It wasn't around, I think, when we were talking about this on the listener stream. Like, they hadn't begun it yet, but it's since begun, and you could support that. Or we're also what we are contributing to is those same folks have started something called the New Anime System or New Anime Making System project, where they want to kind of just do a whole new approach on everything to do with how an anime is made, not in terms of the technical aspects, but in terms of how the workers are compensated. So
we're still contributing to that going forward.
Yeah.
So definitely do check our Patreon. All right. Speaking of Patreon, we actually have Patreon questions that are in about the final episodes of Listeners. So I'll be going through them now before we get to our specific talking points. The first one comes in very appropriately from Go-Go Toy Robot. This references an ANN interview, which I actually have on screen, and I will read out.
Oh yeah, let me pull that up too. I've closed it. Why have I done this? I can bring it up easily though.
Well, to be fair, the interview is terrible. I'm just gonna come out and say that.
Yeah.
But
like we said last time, no No slight to Lindsay, who conducted the interview for ANN. It's,
Lindsay's awesome.
Daisato was just a poor interview.
I think he might have just been on NyQuil or something. Maybe he'd just woken up. Who can say? But
maybe he wasn't very emotionally invested in this project, Shadon.
Well, I certainly wasn't.
Maybe that's the case.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's one thing me and Sato-san agree on, that neither of us could really give a shit about this anime. You know what I mean? But anyway,
it makes it hard. It makes itself hard to give a shit about. I will say, as someone who is going to defend aspects of the show, it does to like most. How do I say this? To anime fans, to people watching TV shows, and approaching this as just a TV show to watch, like, it makes itself hard to care about, no doubt.
Absolutely. So this coming from Gogo Toy Robot. In Daisato's ANN interview, he compares listeners to a road movie. How successful do you feel listeners is at portraying the themes of a road movie, and why? So, I think you can also just mention that I seem to be a lot quieter than you are, so I'm going to increase the volume on my microphone.
Okay. Sorry about that.
I've turned myself up there, so you should now be able to hear me better. All right. So I think before we actually answer this question, though, Doc, we need to establish a common ground on what the themes of a road movie are. Gogo Toy Robot actually linked us an article that was written in 2007 in the New York Times by Walter Sellers about notes for a theory of a road movie. I've skim read this before. I've not had the opportunity to skim read it again, unfortunately, prior to this stream. But for me, like, if you're going to do a road movie, you need a couple of things. First of which is you need good locations. You need good places to go to, interesting places, places you conceivably, as an audience member, would want to see firsthand. Maybe not necessarily be directly involved in the actions that are going on there, but you still would, want this to be interesting vistas. And secondly, I think you also want the characters to have a reaction to the locations. Both in terms of just simply like being enthralled by it, so that way it mixes together well with the audience's reaction to it. Like, the characters need to care about where they're going, basically, so we in turn can care. And then secondly, they need to also then be changed. It needs to form a part of their dramatic arc that you expect in, well, any decent story, really, where the locations, like, factor into how they grow as people. So those are the two things off the top of my head that I can think of that are important to a road movie. Would you agree with that?
I'll say yes. Sorry, I was fiddling with the technical crap in the background, trying to make you louder, so I haven't been able to follow along with your answer as much as I like.
I'll be getting very loud later on, folks. Don't you worry. So, but yeah, basically, good locations that change the characters and fold into their, arcs.
Did he really say this? What?
Well, let's just go. Let me go.
He totally does. He totally does. So, like, we decided to tell a road movie-like story in a fantasy world. I mean, like,
the show does not take place in a roving location, though. It's in Londinium. So I don't know how applicable that is.
The second half, anyway. The toilet was a great location.
Yeah. The thing is, Dorian, I don't know if you're, like, joking or not, but even if you are, like, there is a grain of truth to that the spooky toilet was one of the more interesting places in the entire show's run.
Yes. Yes.
So,
it was super good. Super good.
Okay.
And it totally abandons this, like, structure. Basically at the point we start covering, like, episode 9, I would say. I mean, I guess you could argue, like, episode 10 is sort of that, but it's also, like, not a real place. So I don't know if that counts, but, it's all in Echo's mind.
I could go, like, a mile down the road and end up at a farm. Whoop-de-fuckity do. Congratulations, listeners.
I just think that's so sort of not what it's going for in the end, I'll say.
No, I would agree. So, okay, do we have interesting locations? Obviously we joke about the spooky toilet, but there are, decent places like Princess City, for example. That was, in fact, I'm now having seen the whole show, I think that episode was probably my favorite, along with episode 2 and episode 3. The rest of them just kind of washed over to me or actively annoyed me. So, yeah. But, we do have interesting locations, and I'll credit them this, like, at least with the artists that they brought in, they did extrapolate their motifs, their visual design, like the visual imagery, like that they cultivate about themselves, like into it locations. Like the Pink Floyd one, like didn't give a toss about the episode whatsoever, but at least it was interesting to look at. So I think it did that reasonably well. But when I said before about the idea of there are two things you need for a road movie, there's something I need to clarify with that, is that these two things aren't equivalent in my mind as far as like what's important. The having nice visual interesting locations to me is a secondary thing to having the characters be changed by them. I mean, like, God, I'm trying to now think of other road movies off the top of my head, and well, in case you don't know, folks, it's currently 27 degrees in my living room. I have no air conditioning and no fan on because I don't want to have any noise getting on the microphone. So currently my brain is not working, and you may insert your own joke of when is it ever, but anyway. So yeah, but like, there are plenty of road movies out there where the locations are not all that visually interesting. I mean, Mad Max is mostly, for example, like desert places, but it's got colourful characters in it, so that's something. But for me, like, the characters being changed or affected by where they are, I don't think that ever really applies in this show, or at least it didn't feel that way to me. Like, okay, there are lessons that some of the people that they meet in Palm, like you have Billin and Kevin, like saying, like, hey, you got this, like, you're the new generation, that kind of thing we've already discussed previously. And then you have Prince's thing, which was also, in itself, like, really interesting, the duality thing, and I think that's where they put the most effort in, clearly. But, and this ties into a wider complaint I have with the finale, like, first off, I don't think Echo's, like, starting arc of I lived a simple life as a junk collector and I had no ambition to think about the outside world pays off at all. I don't think, like, he doesn't, like, make any, like, interesting observations, like, through later episodes about, like, where he is and all that. Like, it just seems like he gets swept without really changing as a person in that way. And that's a wider problem also with the show's character development, in that things just kind of happen to the characters rather than them being internalized, particularly with what happens to Mu in the finale, because, well, I'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah, let's not get ahead of ourselves.
It's tied into a lot of things, but I think that it accomplishes the first element of, okay, there are cool places that we can visit. I mean, even Londinium, like with the hexagonal Big Ben, like, serving as the military fortress, that's neat in of itself. That's good. I like that. But also, like, the last third of the show, the road trip stops.
Exactly.
And it doesn't even stop really because the characters want it to stop. Like, things just happen to them, and that's kind of it. So, yeah, I'm gonna say, like, the lack of actual.
Well, they come to their destination in some ways, because the whole road trip was about meeting Jimmy, and they come to this place where they find out, well, Jimmy's dead. There's no more Jimmy, and then, like, the whole switcheroo comes around when Tommy is like, actually, you're now the new Jimmy because here's my evil scheme and all that jazz. And again, I just think this is like looking not at what Daisato says in this interview, but like just sorry, I bumped the mic. Looking at like the text as I experienced it, I feel like the road stuff is so kind of not what this all ends up like really being. Like the experience, like what's really important to it is so much more conceptual, and honestly, like so much more to me, there's a lot of similar things that go on here that are going on in Evangelion, but they're done very much less well here. And I think that, it is, at least for speaking for myself, like it's less, like I feel those emotional punches less because, like I wasn't like, invested in like the drama of what's actually happening. Like I'm sitting there trying to piece together kind of a narrative, like, what does this mean? What does that mean? Which is probably not the best way to kind of go into this. I should sort of be letting it wash over me as an experience, but I was trying to do that. And yet the only way I could kind of attach myself to it as a watch was like trying to find a through line where I could kind of connect the dots on a lot of the things that are happening in the last third, which, as we said, feels a lot different to the first two thirds. And I think it would have all landed better if we really cared a lot more about Mu and Echo and felt their connection better. I think those
for that, man.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think a lot of that stuff was handled pretty clumsily. You know, it's interesting that in this interview, Daisato talks about like, well, the core ideas for this stuff were Jin's, and we like collaborated via like a distance. Like we wrote about like the world and stuff like that. And he says specifically like that. So Lindsay asked this question: how would you describe your work relationship with Jin? Do you collaborate simultaneously? And he says, Sato.
I have a very bad work relationship with Jin, to be quite honest, but that's just because I keep drinking it.
Oh,
sorry.
Hey-o.
I had to make that joke.
Right.
I had to make that joke. Come on.
He keeps beating me in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. I hate him. The big robot fist. So Sato says, first off, the core project was Jinsan's story and music. So we thought together about the setting of the world, the structure of the story, and the actual writing of the scripts. We shared ideas and offered feedback on scripts we wrote, a method of working that I don't really use much. So I feel like, you know, right there is a really interesting little tidbit that the way he kind of worked on the show, he being Sato, was different than the way he worked on things like Erica 7, Cowboy Bebop, Ghost of the Shell. And so maybe that sort of distance he has from it, right, where he's like doing it collaboratively rather than just himself in a notebook doing it all, like maybe that is what affected it and made it seem, I don't know,
too many cooks.
Not even a case of too many cooks, because like you could do it that way, like a lot of people do work that way, but maybe just Daisato doesn't work well that way. I mean, he said this is like the first time, and he's been doing this a long time, and like to suddenly sort of approach writing an anime in a totally different way than you've ever done. I'm not surprised that it ended up as a lesser sort of thing.
You saying it's a lesser sort of thing is so funny, because that's going to be something I'll talk about later. But yeah, like. All right. Anyway, thank you very much for that question. Go over time, Robert. We'll move on to the next one, and this one comes from Kate Rose, and it goes something like this: for this finale, what did you like best about its show? Was there a character you resonated with, or one that did not work for you at all? If you had known how it would end, would you still cover the show, and your reasons why? Do you want to tackle that one first, Doc, or me?
I can. I didn't really find a character to latch onto. I think that was a big problem I had with the show. I mean, as much as I like a lot of ideas in it, and what I experienced that it was sort of kind of gesturing towards in terms of its themes, I enjoyed all that stuff, especially like the last few episodes. It got very heady, but like it didn't start out that way, and you know, the show as a personal story, I think, was pretty lacking, at least for me. So I didn't feel a lot of personal connection. So like, you know, I could take or leave a lot of the characters. So I don't particularly hate any of them, and I don't particularly adore any of them. Would I have watched it? Would I have chosen to cover it if I knew how it ended? Well, that's a tricky one, because I actually really like I like thinking about the ending, and I like thinking about kind of what the show, in my mind, was saying, and not to like reduce it to this like cube of meaning that it's trying to get across. I don't want to do that, but like that's the aspect of it that I really liked, was all the philosophical stuff and the metaphysical bits, and kind of trying to think about, you know, ontologically, what are the earless, like
Oh, I wish the show had been consistent about that, because there are times when I felt like it was just going completely around in circles or not like sticking to the same script as to what they were meant to be. But I'll go back to that later.
No,
Um,
that's fair. I think it like I don't know if it needs to do that. Like I'm not super hung up on the show like not following like a consistent internal logic. I'm good with that.
I do
And I
think it would
think
have helped us to care about the characters and what was going on if it was internally consistent, though, as well. But I don't
well I
think
like
that like that's the be all and
yeah.
end all of it.
Well, sure. I guess what I mean I guess what I mean I'll go a step further. It's not just that I don't care. It's that I think it's interesting that the earless themselves are intentionally I feel like I would describe them less as inconsistent or incoherent as a concept and more they are intentionally ambiguous such that they're like a layered concept. I think that you could look at them and depending on kind of what you I keep hitting my fucking pop filter. Sorry about that. But depending on what you bring to the table and things like that, you could get a lot of kind of different takeaways of like, oh, this is what I feel like the earless are. This is what I think they're trying to say. And I came away with several. I was like, okay, they work on this level and on this level and this level. And of course, if you put all that together, like you can't, like they can't be all those things. But like in fiction, in art, in allegory in particular, not that this is now, I don't think this is an allegory, but like just as an example of a kind of writing in which like this happens, like characters or forces of nature or places can be representative of ideas and things like that, but also they can be themselves, and if you think about that too much, you're like, wait a minute, this character is the concept of justice, but as a character, they made this mistake. How can that be? And it's like, it's functioning at two different layers, and that's just how writing works a lot of the time. And that's okay.
Was that person of justice thing an unintentional but highly welcome Julia Richard reference, I wonder?
Oh, it was unintentional.
Hey, Mira, good to see you again. It's good to have you back.
Yeah.
All right, so I'm much of the same mindset as you in that I didn't actually care about the characters, but I also didn't actively hate them either. And this ties into my answer about, how to know if it would end. I don't think I would have wanted to cover this because it's like stuff I've talked about in the past where it sits in that middle road where I didn't hate the show overall. And yeah, I had a pretty visceral, like, negative reaction to the final episode. But on the whole, like, my overall assessment of it is that it is very milquetoast. Which, when I'm saying that, when you are literally importing like famous artists like Prince, Pink Floyd, and Nirvana in there wholesale to help, sell the aesthetic and the milieu of the show, and it's still milquetoast, that in itself is pretty damning in my opinion. But like, I wouldn't have bothered covering it because it's not like, say, we're covering Aizoken, which has so many merits. Like, it's still like top 5 for me. And it's also unfair that we went on to listeners after Aizoken, but hey, that's just the way we roll. But it's also not like something terrible like, well, Frank's, because Frank's get mentioned again in a little while, funnily enough, where there are problems with it, and highlighting those problems is a worthwhile critical exercise in of itself. Like, this show has problems, but it's not actively offensive, save for one thing that I'll discuss later.
If it's what I think it is, I definitely have. I think we're going to get in an argument about it. I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but we'll see. I have an interpretation of it that I think is different and charitable.
We're getting back to like the way we used to be, Doc, where like I'd be Rage Monster, and then you'd be like, well, actually, it's not bad. We're rediscovering our old groove here.
We did that a lot on this show early on, and then we were of one mind, and now we diverge slightly again. It's okay.
This is going to be fun. We're back to our old selves here.
Well, actually, Elfenlied is like a meditation on capital and how it's destructive.
That was on my timeline recently, as people were comparing The Last of Us 2 to that, and I'm like, oh Jesus, that's a damning like statement if ever I've heard it. One does not compare something to like I almost said Erica 7 there, but that's my sense would have been true actually. One does not compare Elfen Lied to something else lightly. Like you don't like fire that like special bullet off there.
My favorite. That's true. I'll say multiple things for that. One, I found that entire discourse very tiring. As someone who I have no stake in it, I don't own The Last of Us, and I'm not in a place where I really want to play it honestly right now. So I don't really care. But I found it all very tiring. I think a lot of that discourse took place before anyone even played it, which was hilarious.
Not surprising either.
And also, my favorite thing is when people, because if you looked in the replies to like, The Last of Us is the Elfen Lied of video games, people would be like, except Elfen Lied was good though.
You really do learn who your friends are and your enemies are in moments like this, don't you? Like, right, I don't ever want to talk to that person.
Like, gonna mute you. Gonna mute you now.
Block about, right?
No, listen, no, if you like Elfen Lied, I won't mute you.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's fine. Fair. It's fine. We had fun dunking on it once because, boy, it just caught us by surprise how very itself. That show is so itself. And
there is a very Elfen Lied moment in the finale, though.
Not for me.
Which
no, come on.
There is. We'll talk about it a bit, but by God, when that moment happened, I had to pause because I literally screamed like out loud. I was like, "You." I know what it is, and you're just exactly not right about this. We'll get to it. I'm just trying to restrain myself here, folks. But okay, so yeah, like I think overall, to answer Kate's question about what did I like best about it, like when this show was like hitting its high point with episode 5 and the Prince episode, like where I felt like that's the closest it got to what I think it should have been consistently throughout, which is we're gonna import this artist in. We're gonna use them to create this interesting like set piece episode where they're in this particular place that's very like informed by that artist's, persona, both in terms of like how they presented themselves on stage and who they were as a person and what their music was about. And then in turn, we'll have characters actually learn and do something from it, and we'll keep it visually interesting. Like that to me felt like the peak of this show, and I wish it had been like that all the way through because I felt genuinely engaged by that episode. But the rest of them I just did not care about. So yeah, like that to me like is why I wish the show had been all the way through. So yeah. Purple rained on my parade, mate.
It's true. Kim, by the way, the fact that like they refer to Prince, the other players refer to them as his purple majesty was incredible. It's like if I was the CEO of Twitch, I might make people call me his purple majesty.
or if you were the Grimace.
Right. If you just that's what they call Grimace in at the mascot conventions. His purple majesty.
I'm sure I've seen him wearing a crown at least once before.
Good God. Good God.
Okay, so the next question comes from Mirror on the Wall. How happy are you that you're done with these shows forever? This is a reference both to listeners and Yesterday Wotate, which we'll be covering separately tomorrow. To answer in regards to listeners, I'm not relieved because I wasn't in a place to be relieved. I'm not covering it anymore, really. I wasn't like viscerally angry, say, for parts of the finale. I'm just more disappointed, and it's that classic thing, like, I'm not angry, I'm disappointed in you. But I'm just at least also, I suppose, happy that we can move on to what I will be finger crossing is going to be more interesting material going forward, because, like, that's the thing about
I believe so.
A Milktoast show like this is that, yeah, it's there, There's problems with it, there's things to like about it, but there's nothing that truly feels like it engages me or, like, gets me going. So if I am happy that this show is over, it's a bitter like kind of happiness where I'm not like, oh well, thank Christ, I'm not putting myself through the gristle mill every week when talking about this piece of shit. Or it's more like, could have been so much more than this. Come on. And by the way, I need to put something on the table right here, right now, with regards to my disappointment with this show. Way back when we started episode 1, I think it was Emily Rand. She said, like, how do you compare this to Erica 7? And I, at that point, had not watched Erica 7. So thanks to the lockdown conditions and me working from home, I've been able to watch that entire show pretty much one episode per day. while doing listeners. And so I am in the position where, having freshly come off Erica 7, and then also watching listeners at the same time, I can't help but let my opinion of listeners be informed by Erica 7, which, in case you're not aware, is one of Daisato's earlier shows, and is also, in my opinion, an absolute masterpiece, save for certain iffy bits here and there. But generally speaking, like, I thought Erica 7 was fan-fucking-tastic. And believe it or not, like, there are references to it that, like, in a way I thought, Daisato would think, hey, this is a cute reference to something I did. It's like Trigger's, like, arm folding pose, But like I said with Frank's, though, like, just because you've got a studio specific power move that you like to insert, in your shows, doesn't mean that it's necessarily earned it. And I don't think that the Erica 7 moment that happened at the end of episode 12, before the midpoint of what was episode 12, that's gonna be confusing, isn't it? Like, do you want to say like halfway through episode 12? Like, we mean like the first 5 minutes?
That was a very weird. Yeah, it makes it difficult to locate the moments.
I've never felt an anime so readily admit that it ran out of material. Like, it feels like, when you try and make a movie and you run like 10 minutes short, you're just like, that film with B-roll or some shit's fine, But yeah, like, my opinion of this finale, unfortunately, is informed to listeners' detriment by how much I enjoyed Erica 7, how much I feel that this is I'm going to get this musical put out of the way. It's a bad cover of Erica 7. It is a bad Limp Dick's cover of Erica 7 in ways that really, really, like, make
But
me
you can't compare anything that he wrote to what he wrote previously.
That's Daisato. Just so it's clear what Doc's referring to there. At the end of Lindsay's interview with Daisato, she says, there are many mysteries. Sorry, no, it's not that one. You've previously written other popular mecha series like Erica 7. How does Echo and Mew compare to Renson and Erica, the characters from Erica 7? And Daisato says, when creating something, I can't compare it to anything I've worked on before, or any other work.
Or any other work ever made.
And look.
And that's it. That's the whole answer. That is the entire, like, there was probably an awkward pause after, if that was a live interview and not just email questions.
Here's the thing, right? Like, I'm sure, like, Daisato, he clearly has talent. He wrote Erica 7. I thought it was fucking phenomenal. So I'm not going to pretend like I'm not going to pretend like that he's a like, bad at his job. But like,
it's a bad take, man.
I don't think it's a bad take if he meant it earnestly, but I can't help but think like that maybe in my own cynical brain, like when he was saying that, he just realized himself, wow, I really have produced something that's just like stale bathwater, isn't it? I know that's me being very mean and all that, but hey.
He probably doesn't think that. But I guess the word compare is such a light word. It doesn't mean like, why is this one work exactly like the other? Or like, I'm reducing this work to Erica 7 now because I make this comparison. Or, you know what I mean? It's like, to me, it's like this very low commitment sort of word. Like, there's a few parallels or similarities, maybe even just aesthetic ones. And he totally is just like, no, they're all unique, beautiful snowflakes. Don't. And I don't know. It's silly. It's silly to me.
And well, if he won't compare them, then I certainly will later in this stream. Sorry.
I don't like reducing art to like, this is just, thing X with thing Y thrown it like that's, or you know what this is about? A, B, and C. It's like, if that was true, you could just write down A, B, and C on a piece of paper, hand it to me, and I could have the exact same experience as like watch it. But that's just patently false. Like there's, I don't like reducing things in that manner.
I agree, but the problem is that listeners is so nakedly at points borrowing from the same playbook as Erica 7 that, as I say, bad cover.
No,
same sheet of music, just played differently and badly.
I mean, I think it's borrowing from other things too, insofar as like, we talk about all the time how sort of circular and incestuous anime can be, because Erica 7 itself borrows from Gundam and Eva and Ideon and things like that. So like, it's sort of like, where does it all begin and end? So, but I think in a lot of ways, despite not being able to remember a lot about Erica 7, and while to ignore the similarities there is foolish. I mean, I think is he Daisato really did like lean on that stuff heavily. I do think it is its own experience with some of its own things to say, and certainly like what sort of makes it its own experience is like the aesthetic choices.
The music stuff definitely helps in separating it from Erica 7, although, funnily enough, Erica 7 itself did have musical references in it, not to
no
the
doubt.
same extreme, of course, as Listeners. But yeah, Daisato, like, he has specific things that he brings back, even just from these two works that I've now seen. And I think comparisons are inevitable. And also not unreasonable, but
Yeah.
as you rightly point out, though, there are things to like in this show that it does, they're unique to it, that aren't specific to Erica 7. We'll get to those.
I should answer, was it Mirror's question? Am I relieved
Yes.
to be done with the show? I kind of am. Just because, like, to me, covering this show will forever be attached to sort of like the COVID era, so to speak. Like, that weird is too soft of a word. A really kind of anxiety-inducing, scary time, especially in the beginning. For myself,
where time just seems to have disappeared. Like, I really think, folks, like it's now late June, and I still think it like last week was the end of March or early April.
Yeah.
It's weird. Time perception is weird. Like, so.
And not to say that it won't become that again at some point. I mean, cases are on the rise, of course, in many places in my country. So,
we had 500,000 Britons go to Brighton and Dorset today, because basically, I think that as much as I can criticize the US's responses to COVID, it seems like that we Brits are like, no, you know what? You might be bad at it, but we could be worse.
The old hold my beer situation.
It's not my beer, except the tap is now completely dry because we've been doing it over and over again. Anyway,
Right. So yeah, the show is sort of tied up with a lot of that and kind of being uncertain about the podcast. And, during that time, there were a lot of like scary situations in my own personal life. And so like Listeners is always going to kind of be in the background of all that stuff. Is like, that was the show we were covering when this started. And again, even if that stuff happens again, it just won't feel the same as like, when all this initially was going on. So,
yeah.
But plus, I mean, just in a vacuum, I think that we're going to cover some stuff in ways that I like more than purely single episodic analysis, and stuff that I think has the potential to be better. Because again, as much as this is its own thing, it's really hard to recommend it, and it really can feel like a pale imitation of like other things that kind of do the things that it wants to do better. So that's my answer to that. As far as Listeners, yesterday I don't have an opinion yet because I have not finished it.
Gets that, but what's funny how you were saying like about the idea of watching this show during the onset of the COVID-19 crisis. Like, I'll just mention as an aside that like I think part of the reason, again, because you can't divorce the times in which you watch something from the material itself. You don't watch things in a vacuum. You don't you import your own experiences and memories and feelings into it. Like, there is no pure objective criticism ever. People who want that are people who have nothing better to do than spend their days on Metacritic. And they need to grow the fuck up, basically. But point being, I think part of the reason I enjoyed Erica 7 so much was because it was also in turn helping me get through lockdown. That I had something fun and exciting and engaging to watch every single day that was also of just the right length to get through that time period, funnily enough. So yeah, we can, divorce, the world around us from the means in which we watch a show, be it anime, live action, movie, whatever. I mean, how many retro things are people currently rediscovering right now because of the fact there's less anime coming out in the next coming season owing to this crisis? Like, it's an unavoidable reality, unfortunately. And then we have one final question. This one's directed specifically to me. This one comes from Yukinon, and this is the most predictable question from him ever, because of course it is, because he loves pushing my buttons. What would you rather watch when given no other choice, and why? Franks or listeners? Listeners easily.
Wait a minute. Who asked that?
That was Yukinon. Listeners easily.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Because, well, for one, listeners is half the length. That alone is a big plus point in its favor. And secondly, like, you know, for all that listeners has problems, and it has one particular element that we've kind of danced around and we'll get to eventually that I think is a bit shitty. It's nowhere near as shitty as, you know, like the heteronormative police, like, you know, whatever it was, coming in to ruin someone's wedding or something like that. Gosh, you know,
so do you remember that? So many like just bad choices.
Although, funnily enough, as I mentioned before, listeners commits a similar crime, something that Franks does, which I will discuss when we get to it. Because I just keep seeing this happen, and I'm just like, oh, for fuck's sake, can we stop having this fucking repeating? I'm dancing around it, and obviously I probably shouldn't and get to it eventually. But yeah, listeners every time, without fail.
Yeah,
length alone
100%.
Length alone pushes it over the line, but also it's just less offensive. So yeah.
Oh, Daisato, like the resume
Daisato
speaks for itself. Like, yeah. You know, I mean,
he wrote the anti-Franks, which was Erika 7.
Yeah, the Cowboy Bebops, the Ghosts in the Shells, and there's plenty of other work. I mean, and there's some misses too, but like, you know, when one of your big misses is listeners, I don't know. I feel like that's not as big of a crash and burn as, you know, Franks. So, but that's just me.
That's true. Right, that brings us to the end of our Patreon questions. So thank you very much to everyone for posing your questions. Similarly, I just want to thank both our patrons and our audience in general for their patience and understanding during this time. Ideally, we would, of course, want to continue doing it weekly during lockdown, but as Doc has mentioned, like, there have been things that have gone in the way of that. They're not things that I can talk about, because they're not specifically, like, I won't speak and say what's been happening in Doc's end, because that's his business, and that's for him to keep as private or as public as he so desires. But now we're going to try and get back to a more regular routine here of doing it weekly again, but with a different format, which we will discuss later. So we're going to have some changes coming about. But yeah, I do sincerely thank you all very much for your patience during this time with us. Thank you very, very much for that. Oh, and before I forget, we should also commemorate the fact that we passed 500 subs. 500 things. We passed 500 things. I stammered. We passed
500 sub sandwiches. Thank you.
So, yeah. 500 subways, 500 subway footlongs on YouTube. So thank you very much, everyone, for doing that. That's really, really kind of you to do. So if you've not already subscribed, you know, might want to go over there. You know, keep the numbers rising. You know, I like big numbers. Keep them coming. All right, talking points. Yeah, we're not going to do a plot summary, as I mentioned, so we're just going to get straight into the talking points. We're going to assume you've seen it all. We will provide context for the points we're talking about, so at least you know what we're getting at. We obviously won't explain the plot in full because we'd be here for 2 hours of just reciting the plot when, you know, Mew gets maced and turns evil. The end really could be my quick summary there. You know, you can correct me if I'm wrong there, Doc, but I feel like I'm pretty on the mark there.
I mean, I guess it depends on how you're looking at it. Like,
I'm just being very, very snide, I admit.
Like, because there's you know. Like what plane are we talking about the events occurring on, right? No, I think there's more to it than that, but look, this is not a hill that I'm willing to die on, because I don't think it's worth all that fuss. But I think that there is something happening. Like, I don't think it's just a bunch of noise and bullshit and drivel.
Fair enough then. Right, do you want to go first with your talking points, or
no? You go ahead.
Right,
you go first,
okay,
my friend.
So I'm going to get one of the relatively minor complaints I had out of the way here. But it's funny how, like, when I was thinking of this problem, like, that it made me realize retroactively that it had always been a problem. which is strange. And it's the reason I say it's a minor one is because when we talk about mech shows, like you and I discussed this when we talked about Erica 7 on our After Hours podcast, the cold truth of it, or rather a cold way of looking at it, I suppose, is that the mech element is just the sauce that goes on top. Like, what really matters is the character interplay that happens. Like, when two characters fight in a mech, like...
I'm rethinking this position that I've already put out there on our other show, but yes, this is what we said. Yes.
Yeah, that, like, it could potentially just be replicated by having them fist fight, for example, or, have a gun battle or something like that, really. Now, I'm not trying to devalue this. I'm not saying that there is no value aesthetically or even just in terms of sheer enjoyment from it being a mech battle. Like, they could be fantastic, don't get me wrong. But this is also why I say this criticism of mine is lesser relative to the other major problems I have with the show. But I want to put it out there, like, Echo becomes a player. That in of itself I thought was a crock of bullshit because it just seemed to happen out of nowhere.
It did happen before to someone, right? To one of the Sex Pistols guys.
Yeah, but like that just happened. And like yeah, like come on, guys, But the problem that I have with this is it robs Echo of the specific role he served in the pairing with Mew, which was that he was like the technician and she was the pilot. And I think that is such a waste that they didn't actually do anything with that. And that's why I say this is a retroactive complaint, because if you think about it, like, we didn't really see, for example, I can see scenes like of this show, like, hey, like Echo's tinkering with the robot, he's adding new things to it, new parts, new weapons, etc., etc. And then, like, one of them backfires because he's too enthusiastic about adding new things to the robot. And then, like, it doesn't work in the battle, and Mew's like, you've got to take this more seriously. I know this is your hobby, but now our lives are on the line, blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah-de-blah. But that's the point, though. Like, him becoming a player, apart from the bullshit in of itself, like that point has, it just goes to show that relationship where I would have hoped to have actually been more like the technician he was meant to be, like, building, enhancing the kit, repairing it, etc. Like, that was never really a thing in my mind. And I feel that's such a missed opportunity, because it could have not only, as I say, made for more interesting robot fights, because if you think about it, we got top boost and that's it. Okay, cool, whatever. Where's more interesting things happening with the robots? Where's more visually creative stuff, like...
Right.
And
it really didn't. It really didn't like hold up its end of the bargain on that end in terms of being like.
The robot fights were lasers. That's basically it.
I mean, you thought, at least I thought, when at the end of the first episode, maybe it's the end of the second, when they're leaving Livchester on the train, and you see the new Boughton sisters in their robots. Just like, oh my gosh, like there's gonna be a bunch of robots and they're gonna have like duels and it could be cool, but again, like it just didn't end up being about that. So yeah, that is a point. The lack of robot action, and like you said at the end, it really does just sort of become the Gunbuster final battle writ small, where it's just like two big swaths of some good guys, some bad guys, like lasers, and then it becomes like a one-on-one fight between Mu and Echo, but like it's not really a mecha battle. It is, but it isn't. So yeah, I think, but him becoming a player, I guess I have ceased to have a problem with that, because again, I don't think that this show is really about like, let's have some hard and fast rules that we stick to and like really play in like the real world, like it is clearly willing to forego that stuff to kind of make statements or kind of create images that and evoke feelings in you that it wants to. Because I mean, I think like I don't think, I mean, if you did want to be like, well, why could he become a player, right? And why did that one guy become a player? You could just be like, well, it just happens when to someone who like purpose in life or whatever, or goals like really crystallize in a way for them, and they have like the will and the means to achieve them or something like that. Like you could, figure something out to cobble together some kind of definition.
I'm never really hung up on that particular point in the Echo's case, but as I say, my main criticism is that it robs him of what made him interesting and unique in the relationship between him and
You just prefer gender roles to be one thing, like how they are, and they can't change them.
I know you're joking there.
I am totally joking. No, I'm completely joking. What I couldn't really wrap my head around was like, why in the post-credit scene is Echo not a player anymore?
I even thought about that, but
like,
then again,
it's so weird.
Everything that happens after the post-credits, in my opinion, is either needless fluff or confusing or downright bullshit. So you know what? Just add that one to the list.
It's like the sort of it is a move that I'm not the biggest fan of. That like, but I don't know. I mean, I guess I can kind of see how people like it. That at the end, whenever like the romantic kind of interests have overcome these huge obstacles, it's important to then at the end have this scene that shows like, well, things are back kind of to how they used to be, right? Like the relationship is, Echo's not a player. He's making inappropriate things happen with his naivete because he's like, look, the hole in my back is gone. Check it out. And Mahu's just like, oh my God, stop. Like, I'm so mad at you. It's like, oh, these kids, just like they used to be, just like they were. But I don't like that. I think would rather see a change, like, oh, these things that happened made a big mark on our lives, and like the we've grown, Yeah.
The world has changed, but they haven't really. Although
I guess it's comforting in some ways, but I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I did find it fitting that, Echo showing Mew his ass, and collectively the audience as well, was a send-off for the, like, this just shows how the show felt towards us, I reckon.
Jiro, Jiro, I don't think it was a season 2 setup. It was just very much like it was the period on the end of the sentence, very much.
Pretty much. I don't think it was PBC that did it with Echo as well, because what was his name? Johnny Rotten, Sid Vicious, whoever the fake Sex Pistols were, like, that happens to them, and they're clearly above like that age threshold. So it basically happened because the plot needed it to happen. There you go.
Yeah. I mean, it's right. That is a way that you could say it, right? That again, if you were looking for it to be like, ironclad, logical, then it's not that. It's just it wanted to do a thing, and it did the thing. So
I just wish Echo did more actual work on equipment. Like I say, give it new attacks. And then, as I said, like in my suggestion, you can have that then drive some actual drama where he's not taking it seriously enough. The thing he installs doesn't work. Mew gets annoyed, blah, blah, blah. You can do stuff with it. There's interesting things that can be done here, but they decide at the end to make him a player. And like, well, that's it. Him doing the fiddling with the equipment and him being the technician is no longer a part of that. And the interesting part of him is now gone. Fair enough.
I think my biggest criticism with the show, well, I don't know, maybe I won't even say that. Maybe I'll think of bigger ones. But a criticism that I definitely felt was how disjointed a lot of the story elements felt to me. And I'm not usually someone who is super bothered by different aspects of the story not like sort of achieving like super tight levels of cohesion where like everything means something in relation to another thing in the story, or everything supports or has a reason for being. I mean, I think that again is like, I think that's just like a way to look at art where you're like only looking at the content and ignoring the form and aesthetic really, and sort of relegating it to sort of second-class citizenry of like, that's style, and like substance is like the real shit, and what was I saying? Oh yeah, right. But so like there's like this whole big aspects of the story, like the road trip stuff, right? Like that I felt didn't really help what it helped the show accomplish what it wanted to at the end. I don't think the music. It's really funny because I think that the aesthetic choices of this show are valid and important to the experience of the show. But like, I also don't think that that it being about a particular sort of style of music, right, or even music in general, needed to happen to create a show that was like saying the things that this show says, which I'll get to what I think it actually saying in a moment, I guess. But yeah, I mean, I think that the music stuff, very much like we were talking about with the robots, you could have kind of swapped it for like a different aesthetic motif, and in my opinion, like come up with like, if you're only sort of looking at this as like the meaning it generates, you could get an equivalent generated meaning out of a thing with different sort of glue aesthetically. Yeah, and so yeah, all kinds of things. I mean, like, I think the Mu and Echo relationship, it felt really, again, disjointed. Like, there was a time when they're building it, and then there's this time at the end when we're supposed to be like, as an audience, we're supposed to think, boy, like, they sure love each other, and you know, if only they could get back what they had, right, what they lost, so they could reconcile. But it's like, what did they really have? Like,
Yeah, exactly. Like, the thing that gets me about this as well, though, is that the thing that like causes them to separate or like go different ways, it's not anything to do with them having a fallout or like conflicts between themselves. It is forced upon them. And I'm not saying
you're right. No, you're right. You actually are really right about this. I think like they become these kind of like stand-ins for different parts of the big ideas that the show wants to say. Like, we need...
Echo's meant to be a human, and Mu's meant to be an A-list, and it's meant to be about the two things coming together.
Yeah, I think it's meant to be...
I have problems with that, but I'll get to that later. But, like, yeah, like, they are not... I mean, okay, Daisato said he didn't want to compare to Erika 7, or like, I will. So if you want to, like, you know, superimpose your own Erika 7 comparison counter in the top right or top left corner of the screen and have a little ding noise, you know, maybe I'll make a swear jar out of it, perhaps. Then you can do so now, because this is the first one. Like, Renton and Erika, like, when they had conflicts, they were conflicts that were brought on because of their behavior towards each other. Like, Renton acting like a dick sometimes, but then he obviously learns me, grows me, blah, blah. Like, that's what drives their relationships, like, getting stronger over time, because they have things that they do towards each other or to themselves that force them apart and then cause them to come back together again. But in this case, Mu is essentially separated by the government from Echo, is maced, and she goes psychotic as a result. It's not because of anything Echo has done or not done, or anything that she's done or not done, for that matter. It is entirely external circumstance to Osman, and that, to me, makes the reconciliation in the final episode completely hollow, because there was nothing that divided them because of their own actions to begin with.
Yeah, and I just didn't feel the stakes either. No. You just sort of knew, like, okay, they're coming back together. At least that's how I felt. And again, I just think you're so right about that. Like, it feels like the writers really kind of enter the world at that point and grab the chess pieces that are Mu and Echo, and they're like, okay, we need to do something. We want to do this thing with you, so we're taking things out of your hands and we're going to put you against each other to kind of tell this story about like integration and difference and all that sort of stuff. But like, I think that is that's a really damning thing for this particular show. I think it's a hypocrisy, honestly, because there's a point in this when to kind of bring Mu, I guess, back, or to like fully let her know that, hey, I'm Echo. I'm this other person who's acknowledging you. One of the things he tells her is, you know, God fucking damn it, I hit the fucking pop filter again.
Make a count for that.
One of the things he tells her is like, you are more than, like, you're not reducible to like your role in history, right? You're more than sort of what you are in this big grand scheme. Like, you're you. And the fact that like the writers go back on that in such a fundamental way, it like robs them of their humanity to make them pawns in this arc, right, to about this sort of thing. I mean, it feels so hypocritical. You know, he's telling her like, your individuality is what makes you you. Like, you're important. Like, not just like your role in some narrative that someone has concocted. When their own individuality has been, their humanity as characters has been stripped from them, so they could play these fucking roles in this narrative. It hurts.
I don't know if I necessarily want to go into my problems with the resolution just yet, because I've got many of them, but that is certainly one of them. And yeah, it fucking sucks that they had no way to, like, there was no way that I could see it. They could divide the pair. Like, you know, when Renton, like, you know, makes a comment to Erica, like, you know, like, you're less than human or something like that. And that's a part of her character arc where she's, not to repeat too many of my points from after hours here, like, you know, where she's conflating being human with having humanity, when in reality you don't need that. That kind of thing going on there, you know? Whereas here, there's no anything I could, like, in the show's runtime. And this is another problem. I think that for all I can complain about the actual content of the show, I do have sympathy for it being limited in terms of runtime. I mean, comparing like to Erica 7 is admittedly unfair simply because of the length factor. You've got 50 episodes in Erica 7 versus 12 here. It's an apples to apples comparison, but one apple is much more massive than the other, basically. So
a miniature apple.
Yeah, there is a certain unfairness in comparisons like that. So just bear that in mind when I make these going forward, that I have to concede that Erica 7 had a lot more runtime. And in turn, I think that listeners should have had more runtime, along with some other changes. And also, caveat here, or rather just a little preamble on, like, I'm trying as a critic to move away from suggesting what I would have done differently, because I do, as I've said before, think there's a certain amount of arrogance, like, I know better than you, blah, 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 blah. But I'm just trying to hopefully try and frame it as, like, you know, ways in which it would have made the show better and, like, what's wrong with it, rather than just being an ego thing. So I apologize for what I'm going to be saying going forward, but I am at least trying to be self-aware of it. All right, so let's see, my next talking point. I'm going to get this out of the way because I want, and this is also going to lead into a little something else, but I want to address how that moment where I went, what? Was when the Sex Pistols suddenly and inexplicably were alive again. Even
that's not what I thought you were going to say. Whoa, okay. Hit me. Tell me why this bothered you.
Because they're just alive again when they were dead previously. Well, okay, there's more to it than that.
It's Grandma's fault.
There's more to it than that, but, like, the problem Near, in my opinion, like I echoed, I spoke of a lot, like in episode 4, about the problems I had with the portrayal there, but, like, I'm going to move away from even comparing Near to Kurt Cobain or any of the Nirvana related stuff for the stuff I'm going to talk about now, and just talk about why Near is undercooked as a character in general. First off, the only thing that Near really does in the show's run is get mad at Mew for killing them, you know, the Sex Pistols. A sentence I never thought I'd utter in my life, but here we are. You know, Kurt Cobain watches the Sex Pistols die and wants to murder this anime girl. You know, who'd have thought it? But, like, that, as I said before, even when that happened, like, I hate the idea of misunderstandings like this that don't have any payoff. Yeah. You know, Mew's gonna go fight Echo. Near's gonna fight Mew, and, you know, at least Near didn't die. I thought that was totally gonna happen, but nothing came of it. Like, Near fights Mew, and so what? What actually came of that? Was anything substantial? You know?
Oh, let me think. Let me cast my mind back. Near gets a bloody eye.
Yes.
Right?
Okay, that's one.
And maybe okay. Hear me out. Maybe the idea was, so I guess it just depends, right, on what you think Moo represents here, right? Or if you think she represents anything at all, or the earless. if so at one point, when in episode 10 Echo is learning about the origin and the history of the earless, right, how they came about, they just kind of appeared, and it seems like, we get a couple different accounts, right, of what things were like for the earless and how they ended up is this oppositional force to humanity. The one given by what's his face, the farmer guy, in episode 10, like Jimmy's uncle or whatever, and Janice's uncle too. I like Janice. Janice was all right, by the way.
I've got things to say about the Stone Freeze soon.
The family Stone Free. There was no Sly. Maybe the calf that they helped birth they called Sly. Okay, so we find out, right, that the earless, they were kind of hanging out with humanity, and humanity was like, we fear you. And, the earless took that pretty hard, and humanity was like praying for something to help them, and the origin appeared, and they were able to, through the origin, which I guess is like music, right, or art or expression or whatever, they're able to like express their feelings, and they expressed a lot of negative feelings, rage and all this stuff, and like the earless sort of came to, like, they fed on that. They you could almost like they came to embody that. Like, they took on the sort of full weight of negative human emotion. You look like you're going to sleep. I'm sorry.
I just had an itchy eye. I just want to mention, by the way, the origin. I am very disappointed there wasn't a small dog next to it, because then it would have been the HMV, his master's voice logo. That would have been a neat reference. That would have been a neat reference. But
that would have been, yeah.
It's just the gramophone. So and also I'll just point out, like, okay, yeah, you've got the gramophone thing, like, but that's not the origin of music. Like, what you're talking about there is the origin of easily, like, replicating and distributing music media.
Sure. Well, I mean, it doesn't matter. It doesn't. I mean, it's not meant. It's representative of something, right? Like, you could make an argument for.
It looks cool. There you go.
For different stuff, yeah. I mean, like, when objects of worship, they're arbitrary, right? So anyway, you could say, like, that the earless kind of came to take on the full weight of negative human emotion, and that is what everyone is fighting against in the end. And you say, like, what is the point of what Nier did? Well, I think that all the different players took these various different approaches to fight the earless. They had these different reasons, and the reasons here, more so than the actual battles and tactics, were what was important. Like, the My Bloody Valentine people, they had this, like, long sort of standing guilt. They felt like responsible for running away last time, and for Billin felt responsible for what Mu had become, because she'd kind of foreseen it, but she let it go. Prince Denka, his purple majesty, his big reason was he would, like, subsume all these negative emotions with love and just destroy them, blot them out, like, use the love blasters. And they all kind of had their, and Nier fought with an even sort of more, what they thought was this even more powerful, negatively emotionally fueled hate. This is fighting hate with more hate, right? Like, fighting the sum total of negative human emotion with, like, their own desire for revenge. And it's just again, it sucks because it feels like you're doing down the characters, that you're sort of saying, like, here is your entire purpose for the story or whatever. But for this part, the way that I read it was that Nier fighting against Mu here accomplished, like, you're meant to be showing that there's all these bad ways to approach this problem. And Echo had the approach that was a good one, and brought healing, and brought integration, and brought, like, the on one level, different beings, on another level, different sides of the cell, like, however you want to kind of interpret it, like, was integrative rather than destructive. Everyone else had these different kinds of destructive approaches, and that just yielded bad things and defeat. So that's kind of like what I thought Nier's whole point in that. Not that's sort of a bad way to say it, but the point you were saying of that scene, Nier fighting Mu.
I should respond by saying I actually hadn't thought of it in that way, and I see where you're coming from, and I like it. So yeah, thank you for pointing out. Like, I do agree with you there, but that doesn't mean that Nier couldn't have also had something for her own character.
Oh, totally. Yes, I agree.
I mean, this leads into the wider point, which is I wish they'd done more with her. And I'm not talking in terms of, like, again, divorced entirely from the Kurt Cobain stuff. Like, I don't care about that anymore. But this made me realize something that I really, really think this show should have done, because it would have also made the sense of betrayal felt by Nier much more palpable and much more, like, empathetic for the audience, like, invoking feelings of empathy from the audience. Because, okay, putting aside the fact that, Mew was maced, and that's why Mew's gone crazy. Obviously, Nier doesn't know that. So I'm fine with that from a writing perspective, that Nier's operating on the faulty info there. That's what happens, People have false perception all the time. But I think that, like, the response that Nier has, like, with these people that she's only known from one episode, and doesn't even think, wait, why has Mew gone psychotic? Like, that all fell a bit off to me.
I know, yeah.
You know what they should have done, though, and this is going to be me comparing...
They formed a deep bond.
Well, here's the thing. This is going to be me comparing this show to, of all things, another road anime, although you might not think it's a road anime, Made in Abyss. Have you seen that, Doc? I can't recall if you have.
I've seen part of it. They do walk down the road.
I don't know how much I can... All right. I can keep it spoiler-free then for Made in Abyss, for Doc's sake, but basically... I think that Nier fulfills the same kind of role in the show as Nanachi from Made in Abyss, a character you will not have met yet. I will say no more than that. But what this makes me realize is that what they should have done is, after episode 4, Nier should have come with Echo and Mew. And then they could have had more character interaction as a result, which would have helped sell the sense of betrayal later on. Rather than just having Nier pop up again and having us, like, try and care about what's going on, like, with her and the sex. I think this is something they should have done, because part of the road trip thing as well is the potential for picking people up and taking them with you. So I think that's a real missed opportunity there to keep this character in, because that would have also helped with the problem that I have with the show, in that, like, the artists appear and then they disappear, like, from pretty much the rest of the show. Like, they've done their bit and they're gone. Like, at least I would have broken the mold a little bit. We could have had ongoing things like, wait, okay, there's like, okay, I was being used by Hole, Courtney Love, whatever, but now I'm with two people who actually like me for who I am, and we're friends and all that. And then, oh no, Mew's, like, gone and killed 2 of people that I liked, and there you go. That, to me, felt like it would have sold that betrayal much more. And they also should have completely not undone the fact that the 2 were fucking killed. Thanks for that show. I know you wanted to give Nier an emotional payoff, like at the end, where, like, she got something nice out of all this, but you don't also then have to completely undo any sense of drama or why I should have given a shit for all of it. That's bad writing, in my opinion.
I can't disagree. I don't. Again, I wasn't, like, actively offended that they showed up. I was just sort of like, eye roll, lol. But, like, it is. I can't disagree with you. I can't argue with it. I can't argue with it. It was very it was a very, at best, unnecessary to do, I think.
Yeah. Don't, like, undermine the dramatic beats of your story, even if it is in the closing minutes.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bit shit, to be honest. But yeah, my wider point is they should have had Nier join Echo and Mew on the road trip from episode 4 onwards, rather than just disappearing. That'd been interesting to see. And also, funny enough, it then does confirm that Nier's assertion that all players lose their mind in the end was crap, because the only reason that Mew lost her mind was because she was maced.
Right. I mean, again, yeah, I think how they got swept up in this was very poorly done. I don't even know what sort of, if we're gonna do the thing where we're like, we're gonna be the mimetic interpreters and like everything has to like represent something. Like the purple haze, like I don't / teen spirit. I mean, what was the payoff meant to be of that? I kind of don't know what the upshot is here. I mean, was it
that happens to be to begin with is, as I said before, because there's nothing that the writers have conceived of to divide her from Echo. They have to force it's to make the plot happen again.
But they used it before, so like, what was the? I mean, is it?
Well, that's because they knew
I don't know.
ahead of time that they couldn't find a way to divide them properly, so they had to at least do the baseline of establishing it ahead of time, like what it does. So good on them for doing that at least, but I wish they'd done something other than that, or at least had some build up, like of Echo and Mu like going their separate ways or having fights or arguments like that truly divide them. And then you could have still had the gets maced, goes insane kind of thing, and then there's a justified emotion behind it.
Because so doesn't at one point, and I know it's been a minute since you've seen the episodes, but correct me if I'm wrong here, you or people in chat. Nier is talking to Tommy when Nier realizes Tommy has this purple haze, and that's how Mu was, has come under his influence. And Nier says, like, you're the one making me crazy. You're the one making the players crazy. Is this supposed to be some sort of, like, commentary on, like, I don't know, like, the music industry or kind of corporate anything? I don't know. Like, it just, my mind was, like, racing. But, like,
I don't give any credit to this show trying to make a riff on the music industry. And there's a very good reason for that. I'll get to when we talk about the Stone Freeze.
Yeah. Again, I think, the music, I feel like it's almost like the Christian symbolism in Evangelion. I think that there's a little bit, I mean, since they're actually, I mean, well, I was going to say this show actually does bring in musicians, but Evangelion did bring in actual angels. But it is sort of similar, right? I think, in that, in my opinion, like, it doesn't lead anywhere, narratively, or when I'm trying to piece together, like, the kind of meaning and message in the show, divorced from the aesthetics. So it feels a little bit like that for me. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I need to throw in one quick aside, by the way. I called it, or at least I feel like I called it. I love how Echo's sound sickness in episode 6 doesn't come back again.
Holy shit! Because wasn't he supposed to become?
And it never came back.
They did the different thing.
Yeah, again, that's something that's being put in to make the plot happen because they can't think of interesting ways to divide the characters. So they have to have some arbitrary bullshit happen that doesn't then come back. And that got on my grill, that. Wow. And again, I'll compare to Erika 7. Ding. Erika, throughout much of the show's run, specifically after she meets Anemone for the first time, is often quite unwell. And guess what? That does play into the character dynamics with her and Renton, That's actually a thing that really appears consistently and is used to actually drive drama. Whereas here, Echo having sound sickness, wherever the fuck that is, it appears to make something happen in that episode and is never mentioned again. I mean, I'm sorry to say this, but like, if you want to put something in there that's so crucial that, like, and also unresolved at the end of that episode, and you don't then bring it back, maybe don't write it in to begin with.
So that is
rocket science.
Yeah, I mean, I'm right. I don't want to do the gotcha plot hole thing, right? The CinemaSins style criticism, and because it's not like that. That's what I'm saying. I'm prefacing, but only to go and say, like, that's not what I think you're doing, right? I mean, I don't think it is like that. I think,
unlike that prick CinemaSins, I can at least expand on why I'm annoyed by this, because it could have been used for actual decent drama. I won't simply point it and say it's there. I'll say, you know what? Like with Erika 7, maybe Echo getting 6 towards the end of the show could have been used for dramatic effect.
It does feel forgotten about. I mean, it's not a thing I'll super hold against the show, but it does feel like someone just forgot that they wrote that and then did not revisit it again.
Yeah.
Very weird.
And funny enough, both Sophie and Yuki have mentioned in our chat, it's like the sickness in Frank's where it just kind of gets forgotten about, but at least to Frank's credit, a thing I didn't think I was saying, maybe lockdown really has driven me mad. At least it came back fairly consistently for all it was bullshit, as opposed to being a thing that happened once and then never returned.
Well,
I mean, okay, the sound sickness thing, I'm just mentioning in hindsight, like, it's not a big deal relative to the other problems that I have with the show.
I agree.
I do think that it speaks to the symptom of the wider disease in this show, which is that things just happen. They happen to make things happen, and then the consequences of them are forgot about, and then, or in terms of like dramatic or narrative potential, they're not then revisited or made decent use out of.
Okay.
Like the show comes up with ideas that it doesn't then, to me, like adequately come back to and reuse, whereas Erica 7 did many times over again. Ding, you know, comparison there.
So here's the thing I like about a talking point I like, and we are approaching. So I've got about 40 minutes left on my clock.
I'll fast forward it.
Then. A thing that I like is, I mentioned that in episode 10's account of the earless, they say the earless were just these different beings, and then they became hostile toward humanity because they were feeding off of all the negativity and the rage and the fear, and they just swallowed that and they embodied that and they became that. What's that?
It's the Grim from Ruby.
So I kind of love this idea that it's a little scary, but also really interesting to think about, like being in a universe where your emotions, your feelings are more than just chemicals reacting and synapses firing in your brain, like that there sort of is some consequence. Not to say that there's not a consequence to, like, well, there's not just to feelings, right? There is if we turn them into words or actions. But the fact that there's some sort of consequence to human feelings, right? Like out there in the world, apart from your body and your brain, is really interesting and kind of frightening to think about. That you could kind of create your own destruction based on all these sort of negative impulses and sort of cycle of, poisoned feelings that you kind of keep going through. If you were really didactic, you could turn that into like a finger waggy kind of lesson. But just as a science fiction concept, I think it's interesting to think about.
That's a neat idea. I just wish the show had backed that up more, because there aren't many episodes in which like we actually see characters doing a lot of like negative emotion. So okay, Nirvana episode definitely, but the Prince one, like that's the City of Love. Why do they get attacked by the earless then? I don't know.
It's right. Like the weird thing about that history is that it sort of makes that seem like that was a one-time event, and the earless are now irrevocably changed. Like they kind of started at this point of innocence, and then they got to this point of hatred, and that's just it, right? I still don't really know why they're drawn to certain places in the show. Maybe Moo does it, but yeah, it's not like the show is saying they'll only attack people that are feeling hateful or whatever. Like I don't think it goes into that. It's just like this is how they became what they are at one point, a fixed point in time.
It is true that you've got to be careful about how much world building you put in, where you have to over-explain the rules, as you say. Like, I mean, for all that I complain, like that, Echo becomes a player out of nowhere. Like, you know what? Like, compared to the Roswell of the show, that's small fry. And there are times in which, hard work and guts, that factor, we'll call it, can work.
Right. Yes.
That's right. It's the hard work and guts factor, It doesn't need to have like a diegetic explanation. It's just something that happens. I'm okay with that. But I think that part of the reason, like, I would be okay with that elsewhere, but I'm not here, is I need to be rooting for the characters. And as I said, I think it robs Echo of like what makes him unique. Which, well, anyway. Right.
I just don't think we came to care. We just did not come to care about him.
No.
Couldn't do it. I mean, maybe if we watched. Sorry, go ahead.
That's part of the problem with the Road movie thing, though, is that, Echo doesn't seem to have much of a response, that contrasts his old life with the new one as we go along. He arrives at Princess City, starts working there. I don't recall him mentioning, for example, this is far better than me, getting junk out of Liverchester's scrap yards, or anything like that. It's just a place they arrive at, and then it's business as kind of usual.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Weird.
Yeah. No, for sure.
This also kind of speaks to a problem I have with Mew in that she has a line, I think in episode 9, I think it is. It's after she gets maced, and she has this scene that I think is really interesting with the mirrors with her and Jimmy.
Oh yeah.
And she says I thought that when I beat you, I'd had all sorts of things I wanted to learn about myself, and I had to pause the episode and I went, what? Like what?
Mm-hmm.
What do you want to learn about yourself? Where's this character conflict that you're telling us you've had that I have no evidence for? In fact, if I recall correctly, your entire character, which I thought was at least refreshing at the start, was you didn't give a shit about the fact that you're Jimmy's clone sister, whatever. You had a counter narrative to that, and yet the show doesn't really do anything with that. I think it would be interesting if the show kept having characters saying you want to be the new Jimmy, and Mew's no, I don't really want to be Jimmy. I'd want to be my own person. Which, funnily enough, ties into the criticism I have of the ending and what Mew turns out to be. Totally.
Look, I mean, I think that these two characters were robbed of their humanity, because, like you said,
irony being,
she was totally
IDGAF.
Yeah, about her sort of who she was or whatever, finding herself, but then it's sort of. It becomes not about her. She becomes this stand-in for all of humanity, asking these existential questions and feeling alone and needing to be recognized by another person or acknowledged. And I appreciate that. And I even think that as a human being, subconsciously, she went through that. I mean, we all, I think that's a pretty universal experience, but it just was not part of her character as presented on screen until it was suddenly, which it felt so wrong. But anyway, go ahead.
Exactly. All right, so I have 2 more talking points. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to try and get through them as quickly as I can, even though I think they're going to be quite incendiary. So I'll get the more incendiary one out of the way first. I am going to point out that I did speak about this before Black Lives Matter came about, which in of itself I should point out is a very, very worthwhile cause. So this point I'm going to make you might think to yourself he's bringing it up because this is a thing that's happening in the wider world. And I will come to my own defense and say that I did talk about this previously with you and said put that in the back of your mind for the end of the show. But I will also say that even if I hadn't, it's still something we need to address. I think this show whitewashing Jimi Hendrix into Jimmy Stone Free is a massive mistake. I think that it should have done that because it's true that so much of funnily enough, shouts to Rexin, one of our patrons. He linked a video in which I can't remember the gentleman's name. He's a black musician. I'm going to look it up now. Actually, where is it? I really should have had this handy first off before getting to this point. I'm such a fucking moron. Here we are. Yeah, it was Nile Rodgers and how he helped create the riff behind David Bowie's Let's Dance. Black musicians have created some incredible work over the years, Hendrix himself, of course, being no exceptions to that. So I could kind of let the show get away with turning Kurt Cobain into a young girl, whatever. But the fact that some of the musicians, such as Prince, pretty much remain exactly as they were in real life, and yet you've whitewashed Jimi Hendrix into this character. Why? There has to have been a conscious choice. Did they not simply not think about it? I still stand by what I said before, which I think this was a criminal error on their part. You can't his race was a part of it. I mentioned the history about how he was part of the Vietnam War briefly. He was still living at the time when Jim Crow was in action. So I'm sorry to say, show, but you really shouldn't have fucking done that.
Yeah, to invoke him as a personality and then not explore any of that stuff feels pretty
tacky as fuck, mate.
Cheap. And
yeah, and you know what the crazy thing is though, because as I understand it, and I could be wrong on this, like him having the name Stonefree, I got the impression that he was adopted into the Stonefree family, at least in the show's terms. And they are black, those characters. But what we said before about the idea of this critiquing the music industry. How crazy and how interesting would it have been if they used Jimmy as a criticism of how white artists have historically exploited the talents of black musicians?
That could have that could have been kind of awesome if they did that. Like that was right there for them to do. That could have been interesting. I would have hated them to have Jimi Hendrix be the avatar by which you were going to do that through, but it still would have been interesting.
Well, this is kind of a similar thing that I've said about the idea of the Ghost in the Shell live action film featuring ScarJo being
heavens,
in of itself, about race erasure, because basically they cast ScarJo in that role because she's a well-known actress, not because it would have made, even though it makes perfect sense for them to cast an Asian actress in an Asian role. Now, however, I will say this, which is that if they had legitimately written the Ghost in the Shell story about the idea of ScarJo being the major, and then having it be entirely about the idea that her racial identity and in turn her cultural identity was taken from her by putting her in the body of this, Caucasian woman, robot, whatever you want to call it. Like, if you go head on into that, if you go straight into it, then you can do something with it. But when you're literally doing it for the cynical reason of we just want a recognizable female actress, that's when it's shit. And that is similar here, where I think if they had literally gone straight on into it, they'd dive right into it, not being cowardly about it, they could have done something interesting with this. But no, Jimi Hendrix has been turned into Jimmy Stonefree, and he's white because, well, yeah, I don't know, answer on a postcard.
Well, look,
bullshit.
We know. we know why.
Well, this also similar to the complaint I had in the Prince episode where they had Lisa and Wendy kiss, but obviously we're not going to show that on screen. If you're going to feature a character, if you're going to feature an artist in real life who has his sexuality is all about his métier, if you want to call that, and in turn has two female members of his band who are all about that, maybe don't cop out on it. Maybe don't pretend that the LGBTQ plus elements behind him, the queer elements behind his music don't exist, or are we just going to put it off to the side? Fuck's sake, come on.
It wasn't enough, right? Like it was kind of like around in the milieu of the city in that episode. You kind of, I don't know. It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough. I agree with you.
Sometimes subtext really is for cowards,
So
yeah, I think I'm sticking to my guns on that one. I think that whitewashing Jimmy is a fucking terrible mistake. I would legitimately like to know what Daisato's logic was on that. What was the decision behind that? Like, that in and of itself would be interesting, but given his interview,
probably
given his interview history here, I'm expecting him just to stare blankly.
Well, Jin-san and I collaborated, and this was the character design, and that's it. That's the answer. Oh, sweet heavens. Okay. I guess I will talk about some earless stuff. In episode, I think it's episode 12. I talked about earlier that there's kind of some different accounts of the genesis of the earless, and you get in episode 12 the account from listeners, King of the Earless, where they say, we showed up and we were different, but we wanted to know. We had this sort of voracious knowledge, right? It's almost like a being kind of came and just suddenly became self-aware, right? That hadn't been before. And so they wanted to know about themselves, and they wanted to know about humans, these other creatures in their world. And so they absorbed human emotion, human expression, all this stuff. And you saw where they ended up. They ended up as this really kind of oppositional force to humanity. But the way Moo puts it, I think, is interesting, because she says, as listeners, right? I did it again. She says, the place we came to was originally we were looking to find out who we were. We're asking these questions about the meaning of our lives and everything. And then we came to this place where we said those questions don't even matter anymore. Mm-hmm. So in a way, I think you could also look at the earless and sort of, I talked about like them being kind of this metaphysical instantiation of like human emotion, particularly negative emotion. You could also sort of see them as sort of the instantiation of the history of philosophy and human ideas.
Interesting.
Beginning with, again, this kind of total like blank slate, a sort of
tabula rasa.
Beginning with a desire to know, right? Aristotle's desire to know, and then ending up at like this place of like meaninglessness and saying like, well, who the fuck cares? It doesn't even matter. And because no one, they arrived at that place, and the way they feel is like that no one wants to know them. No one cares about them. No one will acknowledge them. Like they feel alone. And then like you have like the final bit of episode 12 where Echo, as the other in the life of from Moo's point of view, reaches out and acknowledges her. And like this is where I thought you were going to take issue with the show, because he says
I do. I haven't got into it yet though.
Okay, because he says like you're not reducible to your role in history or whatever. You're Moo, you're my Moo. And if I think like I definitely anticipated you having a problem with this. Is like,
So you're right.
You
read me. You blocked my wake up DP. Well done,
Perry.
Yes.
I could see if you were thinking, what he's doing here is sort of saying like, I define you, or like I'm your reason for being, or I sort of direct your purpose in a way that like Reiji did in Phantom, Requiem for the Phantom, Day Phantom. Because Moo is a name that he sort of gave her and called her. Mm-hmm. But I think something different is at play. I think especially because like they're not operating in the empirical world here. Like this is very much a representation of what is going on psychologically between their two consciousnesses. And what's happening is this is like he's acknowledging her. And when you are a consciousness that's entirely alone, being acknowledged requires someone to see you. And I think this is him saying like, I see you and I acknowledge you, and like you're important more so than like essentially what you are is mine. I don't think it is a possessive kind of thing.
No, I mostly agree with you there. I don't think it's in the same. I mean, it still annoyed me for something I'll get into in a moment, because I am just generally exhausted and tired and worn out about the idea of like, this plot thread where a guy is the foundational myth for a woman, like,
right, sure,
or in fact, let's just take the gender out of it. It just works both ways. It just so happens to be that it's more often than not the man coming in saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to give you all your reason for living. One thing I'll just say in response to what you said there, like about him recognizing, the show really needs to have built up to the point where she felt that needed to happen to her.
Exactly. I feel like this is another instance of this point that we've been talking about throughout this. Is like, boy, like if it was going to be about this shit that it is about at the end, why did we get everything else on the front end that felt like it was not leading up to this?
Yeah, exactly. All right, so just because you talking about the end scene is also my final talking point, so I'll just address what you said. Like, yeah, sick of the foundational myth shit. Can we just move on from it? Secondly, the whole, holding hands and flying down this hole kind of thing. It's the power move from Erica 7, but again, I didn't care. So,
well, it's listen, and it's the super dimensional force Macross episode 2 move.
Yeah, you've got to earn
also
moments like that.
just throw it in there. I wrote it before, and so I can do it again.
It's like Gold
is a power move
all over again from Franks, It's going to do the arm pose thing, and it's going to look badass, except it's being piloted by 2 chuckle fucks that we don't care about. Great. Okay, so there's that, but there's something else I want to mention as well. My understanding of the Airless was that, as you say, they're a formless existence, and the thing is, as I get it, Mew, basically, she isn't Jimmy's sister more that she's the queen or king of the Airless, taking on a form inspired by Jimmy.
Okay.
Do you agree with me so far? That's
I can go. Yeah, I mean, I can go with that. I don't really have a hard and fast theory in terms of like what is Moo. I'm not sure, right? But I can. Let's go there.
It's the thing, right? You were saying about how it's not Echo doing it in a possessive sense. No, he's not. I don't think he's doing it like say Hero does in Franks. But this is still a problem for me because if this is meant to be a reconciliation between these two races, there's a sense of anthropomorphism that's being imposed on Mew here that I think defangs that whole point, takes the bite out of it. That she's still maintaining a human form. Okay, there's meant the whole point that they've started fighting was because the Airless were so unrecognizable, these shadowy creatures, and we're gonna overcome this great divide by having the Queen still be human looking. Okay. This is a problem I think when you get into defying a lot of alien cultures, in that there's still an unconscious desire on the writer's part to make them human or humanoid or anthropomorphize them. If Mew had just reverted to a regular Airless, the one that say the Think Ployd lady was talking to. Also, by the way, well, didn't she say they were the spirits of the dead? But how can that? I'm not gonna get.
Holy shit! You're right, man.
Yeah.
God damn it.
Let's not even get into that.
There's a lot of myths about what they listen. Let's believe the Earless themselves when they tell their story, and not the gnome princess.
Yeah, but that's my point. That's my point. Basically, I think that the fact that while it's not a possessive thing, the fact that Echo wins the day by saying okay, you imprinted yourself off someone else, and I'm happy with you staying imprinted rather than going back to what you really should have been in your own right, which is your own form, the way the Airless normally do look.
Maybe it's recognizing her humanity, right, despite her inhumaneness, or not inhumaneness, but different, but despite her difference, right, or different speciesness, or so here's some mental gymnastics, right? I mean, I freely admit that this is highly speculative, but what if nothing about the Earless, the way they looked, changed? What if this was just sort of when you dehumanize someone, this is sort of what you're doing perceptionally to them. But if you grant them their humanity, you see that, they actually are more similar to me than I even thought before.
I would agree with you were it not for the fact that in the ending, in the post-credits ending, episode 13, we see human Airless hybrids, or Airless who've taken on a human form, wandering the streets of London.
Well, that's what I mean. Maybe they're just Earless, and they're just the same, but they look differently because our perception of them changed.
I just think it's very contradictory of the show to say okay, humans feared them and they went to war because they look so unusual, and the solution to that is to make them look more like us.
Well, I think Tommy at one point says we're all the same, players, humans, Earless, and I think that is kind of maybe that sort of unity is what he's going for. But I mean, I understand what you're saying. I mean, I'm not the show, if it wanted to avoid this objection, could have done things to readily do that.
Yeah.
So
that's the thing. I think I have a I have an issue with this show in general is it plays a lot of stuff very safe. I
Mhm.
think that Jimmy being whitewashed is a unconscious, perhaps even, but still an act of playing it safe, which is something I must again stress I vehemently disagree with. Like, you know,
Yeah.
but
I just don't know if I'm clear on like the earless being non-humans. Even like I don't know. I don't. Hell, man, I don't know. Like Echo can like turn into a player at will. Anything is fair game.
we're off the rails at this point. Like, who gives a shit? Things just happen because they need to. But it's all in service, like, of whatever. Like, I don't even like. I'm not even saying I like your ideas, by the way, about how okay, the emotion going out into the wider world, like, and not just simply being self-contained, like personal internal trauma, like that. I think could be really interesting. But I just wish that the characters had more to them, so that way that internalized element was there, and then it played into that. Because otherwise, I just don't give a shit, And that's really my response to so much of this show. Like, when it works well, but it never truly set my world on fire.
No, me too.
And I think that it makes some mistakes in the name of trying to play it safe, which sucks. And it really does feel like sometimes they were writing stuff on the seat of the pants rather than having a comprehensive plan throughout the entire show.
I agree. I think it's disappointing as a Daisato show, as a Mappa show, as a sort of spiritual kind of follow-up is not the right word, but like a spiritual ancestor. No, not ancestor. Progenitor. What's the right word? Like the later in the family tree one, the spiritual family tree of Erica 7 is a disappointment.
It stole the candle to it. It tries to go for the same beats. Like the whole idea, like I mean, in Erica 7, like Erica is meant to be the representative of this race of aliens called the Corallians, who are themselves incredibly inhuman, like looking, and her and Renson like forming a relationship is meant to be a wider like bridging of the gap, much as it is here with Mew and Echo. Like, it is pretty much the same story and the same ending. It just lacks all of the beats that made it interesting. Even despite it, as I say, try to do something different with the musicians it brings in, which is to its credit. Like, it does some interesting stuff with that. There's some neat visuals. The Prince episode was great. The Valentine one was good because it actually used them in a way that helped the story proper by having the veterans teach the newbies, That worked, in my opinion. And then, of course, we had Spooky Toilet. Spooky Toilet was great.
Yes, the Spooky Toilet was great. And that finale of episode 12 was not a million miles away from some of the ground they cover in the last Evangelion episodes. But again, it's just nowhere near that level of like exploring kind of the human condition, exploring those issues, having characters that you truly care deeply about these things happening to. I mean, just, that comparison, again, falls so very, very, very short. I think of all the kind of clear inspirations that it has in the mecha genre, like, it is just lesser than those things.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm sorry to say, Sato-san, but like, I understand like you don't want to necessarily compare your own work. Like, that's hard as a creator. Like, you don't want to compare stuff to you. Like, you tend to view it quite negatively. But if you are going to like so deeply go into it being like Erica 7's plot points and beats retread, then comparisons are inevitable, and it does not hold up.
Just have them not wear red and blue jackets. I mean, red and white jackets. Like,
that would also work.
That's a thing that you do on purpose. And also, why could no one ever take off Echo's headgear? Like, is he meant to, if you took it off, would you see that he was earless, in fact?
It's like Jotaro Kujo's hat,
Because, like, he's recovered, like, I mean, and granted, this turns out to be happening in his own mind, but he's, like, totally naked except for a towel, and he's been cleaned thoroughly by this, by Janice. I'm just like, didn't take the headgear off. You're going to clean... Just not clean his hair or his ear. Just like, no, just leave this thing on. I'll wash everything else, make him new clothes. Just leave this on. Why?
Yeah.
Why?
Oh, dear.
Anyway,
Well,
it's a silly thing, but yeah, I think we're done here with listeners. We've done it.
I will finish off just by saying that, like, in that interview, Daisato says, you know, the theme of this show is noise, apparently. I don't know what the fuck that means. But what I will say is that it means that I can make... I can... Fuck does that like noise? Come on, man. Like, Jesus Christ.
If you watched the last episode, you'll understand. I'm not sure. I'd have to ponder it some more.
Well, that means I can call listeners what it is, though, because Daisato has given me the word to use, and it's just really white noise.
That's
what it
harsh.
Is. It is the anime equivalent of white noise. It's not offensive. You know, if I look hard enough, maybe I'll see a pattern or two in there. But there's a lot else I'd rather be watching.
That's
better for worse.
I agree with the last bit. Faux show. Okay, do we want to run down our future goings on?
We've got to rate. You know, we got to do our.
Must
ratings.
we do this? I feel like yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna give the show like a 6.5 out of 10. I mean, I think it's above average, but I don't think it's anything that will be remembered fondly in the coming years.
Yeah, I don't even think many people were even talking about it while it was airing. I know that I think it was Nick from A&M was doing reviews of it, but other than that, I don't recall seeing it on my timeline whatsoever.
I know, me neither.
For me, my rating is going to be that I'm going to give the show basically 2.5, like, you know, AC 30 amps out of 5. It is middle of the road. It is milquetoast. It is average. And when I say average, that doesn't mean it's consistently average throughout. There are some bits that are shit and some bits that are good. But that just evens it out to a kind of bland stew in the end. And the fact that, as I said before, that it makes use of artists like Prince and their likeness and their music and such to such little effects is probably the most damning thing about this show. Wah.
Yeah. Don't disagree, my friend.
Yeah. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of that discussion. So let's talk about the new format. Doc, would you be willing to tell us all about it?
Yeah. So here's what we're going to do going forward. Because we were sort of pushed by necessity to do podcasts. By the way, if it seems like, you know, if you're only subscribed to us on YouTube, this is going to be like the first live thing that you've seen in forever. But we've been doing podcasts. You know, you can subscribe on Apple Pods, on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Anchor, anywhere you get your pods. No more SoundCloud, but the rest of it, you know, any place that you subscribe to podcasts via a podcatcher or RSS, you should be able to search for us and find us there. But we've been doing ones that cover like larger swaths of a series. And so we're going to kind of do that because it will allow us to talk about more content per episode, per podcast, and it will allow us to cover more shows in a season. So, and we're going to do a rotating kind of schedule, and we will create a publicly viewable Patreon post that explains all this in more detail. So look for that, and we'll reference that in future YouTubes for the YouTube folks. But we'll include it in podcast show notes too. But basically, we are going to have like 3 shows a season we cover. And the first week that we're doing these new podcasts, we'll be covering episodes 1, 2, and 3 of show A. The next week, episodes 1, 2, and 3 of show B. The following week, episodes 1, 2, and 3 of show C. And then week number 4, we will switch back to show A and cover the next 3 episodes, 4, 5, and 6, and so on and so forth. Now, in a normal season, we would not have any trouble, I think, picking out shows to cover or polling you guys for shows to cover, our patrons and or the public. But as far as non-sequels go, it's looking like there's going to be a little bit of a wasteland for for good shows. So we are, in the meantime, because there's a couple weeks left until the new season starts and gets underway. Because, you know, since we'll be covering 3 episodes per podcast, then we have some time on the front end of the season as well that will be, you know, nothing going on. What we will do in the interim is we got a lot of patron requests that originally we were going to do like audio essays about them. But I think what we're going to do to cover that content for you all is turn those into podcast discussions. Still take a lot of notes, still watch the shows, but then we'll do a podcast on the entire show or entire season or whatever that we were asked to. And that'll be what we do in the interim between now and when we start covering either new shows from summer or retro content that you guys want us to cover in episodic, you know, sort of chunks. Did I leave anything out?
No, I think we got everything there. So yeah, look out for that public Patreon post for more detailed description for us to reference back to. But yeah, we've got changes coming about. We're going to have 3 shows on the go now, not 2, 3.
Yes. And man, I think back to Vinland Saga in particular.
Yeah.
And there were some weeks where it really felt like, boy, we're just talking about the same stuff as we talked about last time. The show's being a little wheel spinning. And like this, I think this format will cut down on that. Like any given 3 episode span, I feel like there will be something new to talk about. And if there's not, that's a big talking point. If like we've watched 6 episodes of this anime, and the first 3 we talked about something, and this 3 there's nothing new to talk about, that's a problem. You know.
Yeah, so. Exactly. Because it is true that some shows are better suited to that kind of format. So yeah, we'll definitely give it a shot, see how it goes. And we'll be looking forward to having you all come along and join us for the On the Way format.
Yes, indeed. And we will again the patreon.com/Warui Deshou. If you're not a patron, you'll still be able to read how we're going to break this down and do this, and how we'll sort of figure out what we're going to cover during the season. All that stuff will be there. So, and I'm sure we'll tweet about it at Warui Deshou as well. So watch those spaces. But I think that's the end of the show.
Just mention, by the way, that we're going to have, I'm going to be doing more side content as well. Final Fantasy VII is ongoing, so you can expect that.
We're streaming it. You're streaming it.
We'll also be doing some more after hours at some point near in the future. So if you are a patron of ours, do start to get those questions in our Discord again. And
yes.
You know, if you want to support us financially, definitely check us out on patreon.com/Warui Deshou. You can get yourself Discord access from that, and be well placed to start asking us questions about the shows we're covering, help us choose them as well for that matter. And of course, we're always up for, you know, a like, subscribe, follow, share, etc., smashing all the social media buttons on wherever you may find us, be it Twitter, YouTube, Anchor, etc. And you can also send emails to us at waruideshow@gmail.com. We're always happy to have constructive feedback on that. And before we sign off, I will just mention again that your patience and understanding during this time while we've been off the air a little bit has been incredible. Honestly, I'm really, 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 really humbled that people have been willing to wait this long for us. Like, I don't know if I'd have had the same patience necessarily in your shoes. But that just speaks to the quality of our audience. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you very much for that. I really, really do appreciate it. Mm-hmm. Before we go, I'll just mention, of course, that with everything that's happening, like, you know, COVID has not gone away. Despite whatever, you know, those fucking idiots going to, you know, Dorset or whatever might think. You know, so do be safe. Wear a mask, wear a face covering, like, you know, like that. I have a bike smock somewhere that I use, you know. I don't have it tanned, unfortunately. But I do look like a really, really shitty Mortal Kombat villain when I wear it. But you know what? It'll keep people safe. That's the most important thing. So respect people's distance, you know, do what you can. But more importantly than anything else, just take care of yourself and your loved ones. Be safe, be healthy. We'll get through it, you know. It's been rough, but I'm not going to pretend it's not been. But we will get through it. So on that note, we'll say our goodbyes. Thank you very much, everyone who's joined us for the live stream. And if you maybe catch them on VOD, thank you for listening too. We say goodbyes to listeners now. I will say, if you get the chance, do watch Erika 7 because it is phenomenal. It is basically everything that this show should have been, but failed at. And I can unreservedly recommend it. And with that, thank you very much from myself, from Doc, from Valerie as well, who unfortunately can't be with us at the moment because she is currently working on a AAA PS5 game, no less. Returnal. She's doing programming now. Yeah, definitely check that out. But from all of us here at Warui Deshou, thank you very much again. Stay safe, take care. And as we're often fond of saying on this podcast, embrace each other, everyone. It's the ends of the universe. Good night.
Bring back the brothers.
I will when I play Final Fantasy VIII. It's going to happen, trust me.